I want you to start by picturing something. Imagine you're a bird.
Or a satellite.
Or, yeah, since we are modern people, imagine you're a satellite drifting silently over North Africa. You're looking down at Algeria.
Specifically the Ores Mountains.
Exactly. And the terrain here is, well, it's rugged, it's chaotic, it's twisted rock and scrubland and uneven valleys. It's nature in its most, unorganized organic form.
It is a landscape that just defies straight lines.
It really does. And then, as you're scanning this chaotic geology, you see it, the anomaly. Stamped right into the middle of the wilderness like a perfect geometric scar is a checkerboard. And I don't mean roughly square.
No, not at all.
I mean a geometry so precise it looks like a microchip printed onto a rock.
Yeah.
It honestly looks like a mistake in the landscape.
It's a very striking image. And what you're describing is often called a ghost city, and for good reason. It was buried in the sands for centuries.
Right.
But to history, it's known as Timgad, or, if we want to use its full official imperial title, Marciana Triana Thamugadi.
Which is a mouthful. And we are definitely going to unpack that name later because every syllable of it tells a huge part of the story.
It really does.
But basically, today we're doing a deep dive into Timgad. This is a Roman city founded around 100 AD by Emperor Trajan. And it's not just some pile of rocks. It's a UNESCO World Heritage Site.
Inscribed back in 1982, and for a very good reason.
Absolutely. So the mission for this deep dive is to look past the ruin and really see the intention behind it.
Exactly. Timgad is widely considered one of the best preserved examples of Roman urban planning in existence. But the real question, the thing that I find fascinating, is how a city thousands of miles away from Italy,
In the middle of a mountain range in North Africa.
became in many ways more Roman than Rome itself.
That's the hook for me. I mean, we're talking about a place that was built completely from scratch. It didn't evolve over centuries of messy history like Rome did. It was planned.
Top down.
And we've got a stack of sources here. Historical accounts, archaeological descriptions of this perfect grid, and some really wild stories about its rediscovery.
Yeah, the rediscovery part is a story in itself. We're talking about European explorers who nobody believed.
It's a classic case where the reality was just so impressive, people assumed it had to be a fabrication.
Right.
So let's start at the very beginning. Section 1, the foundation. We're in the year 100 AD.
Yeah.
Emperor Trajan is running the show. Why here? And why build something this elaborate in the middle of nowhere?
Well, to understand Timgad, you really have to look at the map of the empire at that time.
Okay.
The Ordos Mountains were home to the Berber tribes. The Romans, in their typical fashion, viewed them as barbarians, but really they were the indigenous locals.
And they probably didn't want to be ruled by Italians.
Not particularly. So Trajan needed a bastion. He needed a padlock on the region to secure the passes and, control the movement of these tribes.
So Timgad starts its life as a military base.
It started with a military purpose, but it was much cleverer than just a barracks or a fort. This was established as a colonia.
Okay, let's stop and define that, because when we hear colonies today, we think of something very specific. What did colonia mean to a Roman in 100 AD?
In this context, a colonia was a very specific type of settlement designed for veterans. We're talking about the soldiers of the Legio III Augusta. These were men who had served their time 20, maybe 25 years in the legions. They'd survived the campaigns, the diseases, the forced marches.
And now they need a pension.
Exactly.
Oh.
But Rome didn't have a 401k plan. They had land. The empire would say, congratulations, you survived. Here is a plot of fertile land in North Africa. Go farm it.
But there's a catch, isn't there? There's always a catch with the Roman.
The catch is the location. They put these veterans right on the frontier.
Of course they did.
So you have thousands of battle-hardened, loyal soldiers living exactly where the enemy is most likely to attack. It's a genius cost-saving measure.
Right.
You create a permanent, loyal garrison that feeds itself and defends itself without staying on the active payroll.
You're essentially outsourcing national defense to armed retirees. Here's your farm. Enjoy the olive groves. And by the way, if the Berbers come down the mountain, you know what to do.
Precisely. And they were happy to do it because it came with immense status. And that brings us back to the name you mentioned.
Colonia Marciana Ulpia Traiana Thamugadi.
That one.
Let's break this down, because names have power. Marciana Triana, that's obviously about Trajan sticking his brand on the building, right?
It is, but it's deeply personal. It's a tribute to his family. Marciana refers to his sister, Ulpia Marciana.
Okay.
The name also commemorates his mother, Marcia, and his father, Marcus Ulpius Traianus. It's Trajan stamping his entire lineage onto the African landscape.
It's a family memorial that doubles as a city. Like, welcome to Mom and Sisterville.
Sort of.
Yeah.
But then there's the last part of the name, Timgad.
Yeah, that doesn't sound Latin at all.
That's because it isn't. And this is where it gets really interesting. Timgad has nothing Latin about it.
So what is it?
It's the Berber name for the site. It comes from Tamgut, meaning peak or summit.
So even in the name, you have this collision of worlds.
Exactly.
You have the Roman emperor's mom and sister, very imperial, very Latin, and then you have the local Berber description of the mountain peak just tacked on the end.
It perfectly reflects the reality of the location. But here's the fascinating contradiction of Timgad, and this is crucial for you to grasp.
Okay.
Most of the residents, these veterans and their families, and certainly their children, had likely never seen the city of Rome.
Right. Rome was basically an abstract concept to them, a story they heard.
Yes. And yet, because they were on the edge, the city invested heavily in Roman culture and identity. It's what sociologists might call the Little Rome complex.
I see.
They were trying to be more Roman than the Romans because they were on the edge of the map. They needed to prove they belonged to the club.
It's like when you meet someone from your home country while you're traveling abroad, and suddenly you're both performing your nationality way harder than you would at home.
That's a great analogy. Timgad was performing Romanness.
And nothing proves you belong to the Roman club quite like the way you build your streets. Which leads us to the urban planning.
Exactly. Section 2. The perfect grid.
This is the thing Timgad is famous for. If you look at photos of the ruins, or that satellite view we imagined, it really does look like a chessboard.
It's the gold standard for the Roman grid plan, what we technically call an orthogonal design.
Right.
And because Timgad was built on a greenfield site, meaning there was no existing city to work around, the engineers could do exactly what they wanted.
No navigating around an old temple or a crooked river?
Nope. They just laid down the law, literally.
So how is it laid out? Walk us through the map.
Well, it's located at the intersection of 6 roads, which tells you it was a regional hub from the start. But the city itself is defined by 2 main streets.
Standard Roman operating procedure.
Pretty much. You have the Decumanus Maximus, which runs east-west, and then you have the Cardo, which runs north-south.
Simple enough. A crosshair.
Mostly. But there's a quirk here that reveals the city's priority. The Cardo, the north-south street, doesn't go all the way through the city.
It just stops. Why?
Because it runs into the Forum. The intersection of the Decumanus and the Cardo isn't a traffic jam, it's the civic heart of the town.
The road literally ends at politics and shopping.
Exactly. It emphasizes the importance of public life over, through traffic. It forces you to stop and engage.
I love that. But the outline mentions they had some growth problems.
Yeah, success can be a problem for urban planners. The city was originally designed for a population of about 15,000 people.
A respectable size for an outpost.
A very respectable size.
Mm.
But Timgad was too successful. The good life was appealing. It grew, and it grew quickly. And when it expanded, it spilled beyond that perfect orthogonal grid.
So the center is this perfect disciplined square, and the outskirts are messy.
Loosely organized is the polite archaeological term. But yes, you have this rigid, disciplined core and then organic, chaotic sprawl on the edges.
It's a very human story written in stone. You try to impose perfect logic, and humanity just
oozes over the edges.
Yeah. Speaking of stone, we have to talk about the landmarks.
Mm.
You can't have a Roman city without showing off a bit. If I'm walking down the Decumanus, what am I seeing?
Okay, so dominating the west end of the Decumanus is the Arch of Trajan. It's massive, 12 meters high. That's nearly 40 feet.
Wow.
It's made of sandstone, built in the Corinthian style, with 3 arches. The central one is about 11 feet wide.
And this is strictly a victory lap, right? A triumphal arch.
Oh, it's a statement of authority.
Yeah.
You enter the city, you pass under the power of the emperor. It's also known simply as the Timgad Arch.
It looks so imposing in photos.
It was partially restored in 1900, whereas why, but imagine being a local shepherd or a trader from the mountains seeing that for the first time.
It would have been terrifyingly grand.
It would. And then there's the temple.
The Capitoline Temple.
Dedicated to Jupiter, Juno, and Minerva. And if you want to understand the ambition of Timgad, look at this temple. Its dimensions are approximately the same as the Pantheon in Rome.
Wait. The Pantheon. That huge dome in Rome. They built something that size in the mountains of Algeria.
In terms of the footprint and the overall scale, yes. It signals that the gods of Rome are just as powerful here as they are in Italy.
That is a serious flex. We might be in the desert, but Jupiter still lives here.
And if Jupiter lives here, the people need to live well too.
Which brings us to section 3. High culture in the mountains. Or, as I like to call it, keeping the veterans happy.
That's a good way to put it.
Because you can't just give people a farm and tell them to fight off Berbers. You need to give them a reason to stay. You need amenities.
The good life was a major export of the empire. They provided amenities that made being Roman desirable. For example, Timgad has a 3,500-seat theater.
Let's do the math on that. If the city was designed for 15,000 people,
And the theater holds 3,500.
that's a quarter of the population could fit in the theater at once.
It's significant. It implies that entertainment was a central pillar of the community. And the condition is remarkable.
I heard it's still used today.
It is. It's so well preserved that it is still used for contemporary productions. You can go to Algeria, sit on the same stone benches a Roman veteran sat on 1,900 years ago, and watch a show.
That is mind-blowing. Just the continuity of human leisure. And of course, you can't be Roman without being clean.
Correct. They have found 4 different thermae or bath complexes.
4 of them.
Bathing wasn't just hygiene for them, it was social. It was where business was done, gossip was exchanged. It was the coffee shop, the gym, and the boardroom all rolled into one.
But here's where it gets really interesting for me. We've got the theater, we've got the baths, the temple. Those are, standard. But there's one building that really proves how sophisticated this place was.
The library.
The library.
The library is crucial. It completely changes our perception of Timgad from just a military outpost to a center of intellect.
And we know who paid for it, right?
Right.
We actually have the receipt.
We do, effectively. It was a gift to the Roman people by a man named Julius Quintianus Flavius Rogatianus.
That is a name.
A very Roman name. And we know the cost. 400,000 sesterces.
I love that we know the exact price tag. Here's your library. Keep the change. But let's contextualize that number. Is 400,000 sesterces a lot?
It's a fortune, an absolute fortune. To give you some context, a regular legionary soldier might earn about 1,200 sesterces a year.
Okay, so this library cost.
The equivalent of over 300 years of a soldier's wages.
And he spent that kind of money on books in a town of retired soldiers.
Scrolls, technically.
Right.
But yes, the dating is a bit tricky because we don't know much else about this Rogatianus fellow. But based on the archaeological evidence, scholars suggest it dates from the late 3rd or possibly the 4th century.
Can you walk us through what it looked like? Because I'm picturing shelves of books, but obviously that's not right for the time.
Imagine a U-shaped colonnaded portico. It would surround 3 sides of an open court. You'd walk through that into the main library itself. And that was a large semicircular room, flanked by 2 rectangular side rooms.
So you'd walk through the columns into this grand semicircle.
The large vaulted hall would have been the reading room, the stack room, and maybe a lecture hall all in one. The walls had oblong alcoves built into them.
Like little nooks.
Yes, and inside those alcoves, there would have been wooden shelves. We know this because the design is very similar to the famous Library of Celsus at Ephesus.
Oh, okay.
And these shelves would have had sides, backs, and doors.
So they were like cabinets for scrolls.
Exactly. And it's possible there were freestanding bookcases in the center of the room, maybe a reading desk. It wasn't huge. It wasn't the Library of Alexandria, but it was functional.
How many scrolls are we talking about?
The estimates suggest it could have accommodated about 3,000 scrolls.
That's a lot of reading material for a town of retired soldiers.
And that is the point. The expert view is that finding a fully developed library system here indicates a very, very high standard of learning and culture in this remote outpost.
It wasn't a rough and tumble frontier town where people just drank wine and fought.
Not at all. These were people who valued literature, philosophy, and history. It shows that the Roman dream included education.
It really paints a different picture of the Roman frontier. It challenges that whole stereotype of the grunt soldier. But, as with all ancient cities, nothing lasts forever.
No, it doesn't. And that takes us to Section 4, the rise, the fall, and the religion.
Right.
Timgad's history really mirrors the history of the empire itself. It started as a pagan city, hence the massive temple to Jupiter, but by the 3rd century, it became a center of Christian activity.
And not just any Christianity. This was a hotbed for the Donatists, right?
It was. In the 4th century, Timgad was a major Donatist center. This was a schismatic Christian sect in North Africa. They were hardliners, purists.
Okay.
And Timgad actually had a famous bishop named Optat, who is the spokesman for the Donatist movement.
So they were deep into the heavy theological debates of the time. They weren't isolated from the intellectual currents of the world.
Not in the slightest. But while they were arguing theology, the geopolitical situation was Well, it was deteriorating.
The waves of destruction started coming in.
First came the Vandals in the 5th century. They swept across North Africa and sacked the city. Timgad fell into decline.
But that wasn't the end.
Not the final blow. That came at the end of the 5th century.
Who was it?
The local Berber tribes from the Ours Mountains, the very people the city was built to guard against, eventually came down and destroyed it.
There's a heavy irony there. The fortress is destroyed by the people it was meant to contain.
It's deeply ironic, but that still wasn't the total end. There was a brief flickering of life. We call it the Byzantine Revival.
This is the zombie city phase.
In a way, in 539 AD, the Byzantine general Solomon came through during the Moorish Wars. He retook the city and rebuilt parts of it.
This is when they built that big citadel.
Yes, a large fortress just south of the city. They used Timgad as part of a defense line again, but it was a shadow of its former self. They actually cannibalized the stones from the beautiful Roman monuments to build their fort.
Oh, that hurts. And then
Came the early Muslim conquests in the 8th century. This led to the final ruin. The city ceased to be inhabited, the water management systems failed, the sands of the desert began to drift in, and Timgad went to sleep.
And it stayed asleep for a long, long time. Which brings us to section 5, the rediscovery.
The adventure movie part of the story.
It really is. For centuries, Timgad was just a rumor, or completely unknown to Europe. Then, on December 12, 1765, a man named James Bruce arrived.
James Bruce, the Scottish explorer.
Right.
He was likely the first European to visit the site in centuries, and he saw the ruins and described it as a small town but full of elegant buildings.
He knew he found something special.
He did. He sketched it, he took notes, and in 1790 he published his book, Travels to Discover the Source of the Nile. He included his description of Timgad in it.
And the British public went wild, right? They threw him a parade.
Quite the opposite. They didn't believe him.
What? They didn't believe him. Why?
It sounded too fantastic. A perfectly preserved Roman city with a theater and a library in the middle of the Algerian mountains. It just didn't fit their mental map of the world.
So they thought he was lying.
Skepticism was incredibly high. They thought he was exaggerating to sell books.
That has to be so frustrating. I saw it. It's right there. I drew a picture.
And it took over a century for him to be vindicated.
100 years.
Over 100 years. In 1875, Robert Lambert Playfair, who was Britain's consul in Algiers, decided to follow in Bruce's footsteps. He visited the site.
And
he confirmed everything. He described hills covered with countless numbers of the most interesting megalithic remains.
megalithic. That's a good word.
It implies massive stone structures. Playfair's account, published in his book Travels in the Footsteps of Bruce, finally settled the debate. Bruce wasn't a liar.
He was just ahead of his time.
He was, and then the French stepped in.
Yeah, Algeria was under French colonial control by then. In 1881, they took control of the site and began systematic excavations that lasted all the way until 1960.
They're the ones who cleared the sand and revealed the checkerboard we see today.
It's amazing to think that for 100 years, Bruce was just that guy telling crazy stories at the pub that no one believed.
And yet he was right.
So let's bring this all together. We've got a city built for veterans, designed like a mathematical proof.
Packed with high-end amenities.
Lost to war and time, and then found by a Scotsman.
It is a remarkable arc.
Yeah.
And Timgad serves as this physical reminder of how the Roman Empire operated. They didn't just conquer land, they tried to export a lifestyle.
They wanted to create Romans out of thin air.
Or in this case, out of sand.
The grid plan is the enduring legacy. It's that idea that you can impose order on chaos.
It is, but I think the library is the most telling detail.
How so?
Think about it. This was a military outpost. Its primary purpose was defense. It was a place of weapons and walls. And yet, someone spent 400,000 sesterces to build a library for 3,000 scrolls.
That is a lot of money.
It raises a provocative question for us today, doesn't it? What does it say about a society when, even in the midst of defense strategies and wars, they prioritize spending a fortune on books and learning?
That's a great point. They weren't just surviving, they were trying to be civilized.
Exactly. They believe that if you don't have the library, what exactly are you defending?
Well, next time you see a checkerboard, maybe think of Timgad. A little piece of Rome sleeping in the mountains, reminding us that humans have always tried to draw straight lines in a crooked world.
It's definitely worth a thought.
That's all for this deep dive. Thanks for listening.
Okay, so imagine for a second that you are waking up this morning. You you reach for your phone to check the news, but the news is just terrifying.
Right.
You look at the data for the entire country, and the manufacturing output, the actual physical stuff we make from cars to toasters, has dropped by a third in just 4 years.
And that's just the numbers on a screen.
Oh, yeah.
Right? You walk outside, you look down the street, and one out of every 4 people you see is unemployed. And we aren't talking about between jobs or considering a career change.
No.
We are talking about destitute. No safety net. No savings.
That is the reality of March 4th, 1933, the day Franklin Delano Roosevelt takes the oath of office. It's hard for us to really grasp the vibe of that moment today.
Oh, absolutely.
It wasn't just a bad recession. It felt apocalyptic.
It did. The mood wasn't just gloom. It was panic. And it was revolutionary panic. You have to remember, in 1933, democracy looked like it was failing. Capitalism looked like it was broken. People weren't just worried about their next paycheck. They were worried about whether the American experiment was actually over.
Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today, we are unpacking the New Deal. We all learned the basics in high school history class, the dams, the murals, the alphabet soup of agencies like the CCC and the WPA.
Sure, the acronyms.
But our mission today is to go much deeper than the acronyms. We need to answer a really uncomfortable question. Was this program the savior of American democracy and capitalism, or was it a series of contradictory, chaotic experiments that actually dragged the Great Depression out?
It is the ultimate historical tension.
Yeah.
And to understand it, we have to look at how the administration tried to, for lack of a better word, rationalize a collapsing economy through massive, unprecedented government intervention.
Before we get to the cure, though, I want to spend a minute on the sickness, because the statistics from 1929 to 1933 are honestly just mind-bending.
They really are.
We mentioned unemployment hitting 25%, but there's this other monster lurking in the data that I think is even scarier: deflation. Prices fell by 20%.
Right. And I think for a modern listener, deflation sounds deceptively nice.
Huh?
Who doesn't want cheaper groceries or, cheaper gas?
Of course.
If I have $10 in my pocket and prices drop, I'm technically richer.
Exactly. If you have cash under the mattress, you're winning.
But the problem is, almost nobody had cash. And more importantly, most people had debt. Deflation is an absolute catastrophe for debtors.
Explain that.
Well, imagine you took out a mortgage in 1928. You borrowed money when $1 was worth $1. Now, suddenly, prices and wages have collapsed. $1 is worth $2 in purchasing power.
Oh, wow.
Effectively, the real value of your debt has doubled, but your income has vanished.
That is a terrifying squeeze.
It is, and it paralyzes the economy. Nobody buys anything today because it will be cheaper tomorrow, and nobody can pay their debts. That's why we saw 844,000 non-farm mortgages face foreclosure. It's a spiral.
And the human toll of that spiral is just heartbreaking. We aren't just talking about stockbrokers jumping out of windows. We're talking about farmers in Montana watching their wheat rot in the fields.
It cost more to harvest it than they could sell it for.
That's the insanity of it.
That is the absurdity of the Depression. People in the cities were starving, and farmers were letting food rot because the market mechanism had completely broken down.
The psychological state of the country was pure fear. I read this quote from Joseph P. Kennedy Sr., JFK's dad, one of the richest men in America.
Yeah.
He said he would be willing to part with half his wealth just to be sure he could keep the other half safe under law and order.
That's how close the rich thought we were to anarchy. State governors were declaring bank holidays, which sounds like a nice long weekend, but it actually meant they were authorizing banks to lock their doors so you couldn't get your own money out.
So into this absolute chaos steps FDR. And he brings with him this concept of a New Deal.
Right.
Which I was surprised to learn wasn't even his phrase originally.
No, it wasn't. It's one of those great accidents of history. It was coined by an economist and advisor named Stuart Chase, who wrote an article for the New Republic called A New Deal.
Just an article title.
Yeah, and FDR speechwriter Samuel Rosenman just kind of tossed it into the acceptance speech at the last minute because he needed a snappy closer.
So it wasn't some grand philosophical slogan.
Not at all. It was an editorial throwaway that became the defining brand of the 20th century.
So FDR takes office, the clock starts ticking on the legendary first 100 days. This is basically the emergency room phase of the presidency.
Precisely. The patient the U.S. economy is coding. The administration isn't thinking about long-term philosophy yet. They are throwing everything at the wall to see what sticks.
And they had a framework for it.
They did. The framework we call the 3 Rs: relief, recovery, and reform.
And he didn't do it alone. He had his brain trust. And I have to highlight Frances Perkins here. She becomes the Secretary of Labor, the first woman in the cabinet.
A total powerhouse.
And the story goes that she basically held the administration hostage before she accepted the job.
She did. She was arguably the most visionary person in that room. She sat down with FDR and said, I am not taking this job unless you commit to a priority list.
And what was on the list?
Her list was a 40-hour work week, a minimum wage, ending child labor, and establishing unemployment insurance.
She basically wrote the modern labor market on the back of a napkin before day one.
She really did. But before they could do any of that, they had to stop the bleeding. The immediate heart attack was the banking system.
Right, because bank runs were becoming a self-fulfilling prophecy.
And we have to explain this because it's so foreign to us today. In 1932, if a bank made bad loans and ran out of cash, it just closed.
And your savings?
Gone. Vaporized. Zero.
So logically, the moment I hear a rumor that the bank across town failed, I'm running to my bank to pull my cash out.
Exactly.
And you see me running, so you run too.
It's a contagion. Between 1929 and 1933, 40% of all banks in the U.S. failed. That is nearly 10,000 banks.
10,000.
So FDR's first move is the bank holiday. He shuts every single bank in the country for 4 days.
It was a massive gamble. But the legislation wasn't the magic trick. The magic trick was the communication.
The fireside chat.
Exactly. March 12th, 1933. He gets on the radio.
And 60 million people are listening.
60 million. And he just explains banking. He doesn't use jargon. He explains that when you deposit money, the bank invests it. They don't keep it all in a vault.
And he famously says, it is safer to keep your money in a reopened bank than under the mattress.
And the incredible thing is, people believed him. When the banks reopened, the lines weren't people taking money out. They were people putting hoarded cash back in.
It stabilized the panic instantly. And then, to make sure it stayed stable, they passed the Glass-Steagall Act.
Which created the FDIC.
The Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation. That little sticker on the bank window that says FDIC insured, that's the New Deal.
It's still with us.
And it means if the bank fails, the government pays you back. Bank failures drop from 500 a year to less than 10.
Now, I want to take a detour here because you brought up something in our pre-show notes that just blew my mind.
Okay.
We had thousands of bank failures. Our neighbor to the north, Canada, also had a depression. But how many bank failures did they have?
Zero.
Zero.
Not one.
How is that even possible? Were they just smarter?
It wasn't about smarts, it was about structure. The U.S. had a system called unit banking. We had laws that effectively prevented banks from branching out.
So you had thousands of tiny local banks?
Right. And if you were a bank in a farming town in Kansas and the wheat crop failed, your entire loan portfolio collapsed. You had no diversification.
Whereas Canada
had a system of massive, centralized banks with branches across all provinces. So if the wheat crop failed in Saskatchewan, the bank was fine because they were making money on timber in British Columbia or manufacturing in Ontario.
They were diversified.
Exactly. Historian David Beto points this out as a massive missed opportunity. If the U.S. had allowed branch banking earlier, the Canadian model, the financial crisis might have been a blip rather than a catastrophe.
That is a fascinating what if. But okay, the banks are open, but money is still tight. This brings us to one of the most controversial economic moves, breaking the gold standard.
This is huge. And we need to simplify it because people's eyes, they glaze over when we talk about gold.
Right.
Under the gold standard, every dollar you print has to be backed by a certain amount of gold in a vault.
Which sounds responsible. It keeps inflation down.
It is responsible until you have a crisis. Because of that rule, the Federal Reserve was in handcuffs. They needed to print money to stop that deflation we talked about earlier, but they couldn't because gold was flowing out of the country.
So FDR cuts the cord. He suspends the gold standard and lets the dollar float.
He devalued the dollar. And by doing that, he broke the deflationary spiral. Suddenly, the Fed could increase the money supply. Prices stopped falling.
And what was the impact of that one move?
Well, according to economist Christina Romer, this decision alone raised industrial production by 25% until 1937. It was arguably the single most important economic decision of the entire New Deal.
Okay, so the emergency room work is done. The patient is alive. Now we move into the alphabet soup era. This is the first New Deal, 1933 to 1934. And this is where the administration starts acting like a laboratory.
Experiments is the right word. Some were brilliant, some were, well, disastrous. Let's look at the AAA, the Agricultural Adjustment Administration.
This one is the hardest for me to wrap my head around. The problem was overproduction.
The paradox of plenty. Farmers were getting better at farming, producing too much corn, cotton, and pork. That huge supply drove prices down so low that farmers couldn't make a living.
So the government solution was to destroy the food.
It sounds insane, but yes. The AAA paid farmers to not plant crops. They plowed under 10 million acres of cotton. They slaughtered 6 million pigs.
And this is happening while people in New York and Chicago are standing in bread lines.
The optics were a nightmare. It was a moral paradox. How can you destroy food when people are hungry?
But did it work economically?
For the producers, yes. If you look at the cold economic logic, it worked. By artificially restricting supply, prices rose. Farm income doubled by 1937.
It's a classic case of economic mechanics clashing with human intuition.
Exactly. And the Supreme Court eventually struck down the first version of it, largely because the tax structure used to fund it was deemed unconstitutional.
Then you have the CCC, the Civilian Conservation Corps. This feels like the program everyone remembers fondly.
Oh, it's the most popular experiment. You have millions of young men aged 18 to 25, unemployed, restless, wandering the country.
A dangerous demographic.
Very dangerous for social stability. So you shipped them to the woods.
Literally.
It was run by the Army. Very militaristic. Reveille at dawn, barracks life. But instead of fighting a war, they were fighting soil erosion. They planted 3 billion trees. They built the trails in our national parks.
It's a triple win then. You employ the young men, you send money back to their families, because the check went to the parents mostly,
right,
and you build infrastructure.
Exactly. But then we get to the controversial centerpiece, the NRA, the National Recovery Administration.
The Blue Eagle.
The Blue Eagle. This was the attempt to plan the entire industrial economy. The administration believed that cutthroat competition was the enemy.
What do they mean by that?
They thought businesses were driving prices and wages down to beat each other. So they essentially sanctioned cartels.
Whoa!
They did. They suspended antitrust laws. They told industries, steel, coal, poultry, to get in a room and write codes of fair competition. We will agree to pay this wage, and we will agree to charge this price.
And they launched this massive PR campaign led by Hugh S. Strawson to sell it.
A huge campaign. If you signed the code, you put a Blue Eagle poster in your window. It was like a badge of patriotism. There were Blue Eagle parades. If you didn't have the poster, you were boycotted.
But economically, did it work?
No. Most economists today look back at the NRA and cringe. It created monopolies. It raised prices for consumers right when people had the least amount of money to spend. It was a bureaucratic nightmare.
And it led to the famous sick chicken case.
Schechter Poultry. It's a constitutional law classic. The government tried to regulate a local poultry business in Brooklyn for violating the codes for selling a sick chicken.
And the Supreme Court.
The Supreme Court looked at this and said, wait a minute. The federal government cannot regulate a local butcher shop. That is not interstate commerce. They struck the NRA down in 1935.
So the Blue Eagle crashes. But interestingly, while the agency died, the ideas survived. The precedent for a minimum wage and a 40-hour week started there.
It did. And that brings us to 1935. The emergency is over, but unemployment is still over 20%. The crisis isn't ending.
So there's a pivot.
A big pivot. This prompts a shift in strategy. Historians call this the Second New Deal.
This feels different. The first New Deal was save the sinking ship. The second New Deal is build a new ship.
Exactly. It becomes more progressive, more permanent. It's about building a safety net. And the crown jewel is the Social Security Act of 1935.
It is wild to think that before this, the U.S. was the only modern industrial country without a national safety net.
It was a glaring gap. If you got old, disabled, or widowed, you were entirely dependent on private charity or your family. If your family was broke, you starved.
And the Social Security Act changed that relationship between the citizen and the state forever.
It did. Now, FDR had a very specific strategy for funding this. He insisted on payroll taxes. He didn't just take it out of general revenue.
Why?
This was pure political genius. He famously said, we put those payroll contributions there so as to give the contributors a legal, moral, and political right to collect their pensions.
He wanted us to feel like we bought it.
He wanted it to be a property right, not a handout. He said, with those taxes in there, no damn politician can ever scrap my Social Security program.
And he was right. It's the third rail of American politics.
You touch it, you die politically.
Alongside this, we see the WPA, the Works Progress Administration. This is the big infrastructure push.
The scale is staggering. 8.5 million workers. They built 650,000 miles of roads, 125,000 public buildings, LaGuardia Airport, the Triborough Bridge.
Just incredible.
But the WPA had a unique twist called Federal One.
This is the art program.
Harry Hopkins, who ran the WPA, had this simple philosophy. Hell, they've got to eat just like other people. He meant artists, writers, and musicians. So the government hired them.
It's amazing they hired writers to create state guidebooks. They hired painters to paint murals in post offices.
It was a recognition that labor isn't just sweating with a shovel. Culture is labor, too. And it created a documentation of American life that we still rely on today.
We also see the Wagner Act during this time, which supercharged labor unions.
The National Labor Relations Act. It guaranteed the right to collective bargaining. This is why you see the massive rise of the AFL and the CIO in the late 30s. It gave workers a seat at the table.
Now, I want to pivot here. We've been talking about the average American or the worker, but the reality of the 1930s was very different depending on who you were.
Very different.
We need to look at who was left behind. We often hear about FDR's Black Cabinet, but was the New Deal actually a good deal for African Americans?
It is a massive paradox. On one hand, politically, the New Deal triggered a historic shift. 1936 is the year Black voters left the party of Lincoln, the Republicans, and joined the Democrats.
Why that shift?
They felt FDR was the first president to actually try to help the poor, and they were disproportionately poor.
But on the ground, in the actual machinery of the programs,
Discrimination was baked into the cake. The NRA we talked about, it was jokingly referred to as the Negro Removal Act.
Why?
Because the code set a minimum wage. If a factory owner in the South had to pay a minimum wage, he often fired his black workers and replaced them with white workers. The legislation didn't protect against that.
And the AAA.
Even worse, the government sent checks to landowners to stop farming. But in the South, the people actually working the land were black sharecroppers and tenant farmers.
So what happened?
The landowners took the government check and then evicted the sharecroppers because they didn't need them anymore. The money rarely trickled down.
Why didn't FDR stop this? He's the president.
It was a cold, hard political calculation. To pass any of his legislation, Social Security, the Banking Act's FDR needed the Southern Democrats. The South was a one-party region, and those senators were staunch segregationists.
So if he pushed for civil rights,
If FDR had pushed for an anti-lynching law or tried to integrate the CCC camps, the South would have blocked the entire New Deal.
so he traded the rights of Black Americans for the economic survival of the program.
He did, and nowhere is this more damaging than in housing. The Federal Housing Administration, the FHA, they revolutionized home ownership for white people, but they invented redlining.
Can we break down exactly what redlining was? Because people use the term, but the mechanism is important.
The government created maps to decide which neighborhoods were safe to insure mortgages in. They colored the best neighborhoods green and the risky ones red.
And what made a neighborhood red?
The manuals explicitly stated that a neighborhood was red if it contained, and this is a, quote, inharmonious racial groups.
So if a Black family moved in, the government declared the neighborhood uninsurable.
Exactly. It wasn't just individual racism. It was federal policy. It cut Black families out of the greatest wealth-building engine of the 20th century, home equity. We are still living with that wealth gap today.
That is a heavy legacy. What about women? You mentioned Frances Perkins earlier, who was obviously a powerhouse.
Perkins was crucial. And Eleanor Roosevelt was a relentless crusader, often pushing for more than her husband could politically deliver. But structurally, the New Deal was built on the breadwinner model.
The idea that the man works and the woman stays home.
Exactly. The assumption was that there should be one wage earner per family. So relief programs prioritized men. Women were often excluded from the WPA or shunted into lower-paying sewing circles. It was an economic rescue mission, but it wasn't a social revolution regarding gender roles.
So let's fast forward to 1937. The programs are running, production is up, banks are boring again, and then crash.
The recession of 1937.
What happened? I thought we were fixed.
This is a cautionary tale that economists still study. FDR listened to the fiscal conservatives. They told him, the emergency is over, the debt is getting too high, you need to balance the budget.
So he took the training wheels off.
He did. He slashed WPA spending, he cut the CCC budgets. And simultaneously, those new Social Security taxes started coming out of people's paychecks, which reduced their spending power.
It was a 1-2 punch to the economy.
And the economy tanked.
Yeah.
Unemployment jumped right back up to 19%. It proved that the recovery was fragile and completely dependent on government spending.
The private sector wasn't ready to stand on its own.
Not at all.
This leads to the big question, the one everyone debates. Did the New Deal actually end the Great Depression?
The consensus among serious economic historians is not exactly.
No.
The New Deal halted the collapse, it relieved immense suffering, it built the infrastructure of a modern state, but it didn't bring full employment. Throughout the 30s, unemployment remained stubbornly high.
So what actually ended it?
World War II.
The ultimate stimulus package.
It was military Keynesianism. When the war started, nobody cared about balancing the budget anymore. We needed tanks, planes, ships. The government spent astronomical amounts of money.
And factories ran 247.
If you could breathe, you had a job. That massive injection of spending finally doubled the GNP and ended the Depression.
So, looking back at the theories, why couldn't the New Deal get out on its own?
Well, it depends on who you ask. If you ask the Keynesians, they say the New Deal spending was just too small. The deficits averaged about 3.7%. To fix a hole that big, FDR needed to spend way more like he eventually did in the war.
And the monetarists, people like Milton Friedman.
They view it differently. Friedman argued that the Depression was largely caused by the Federal Reserve's failure to manage the money supply. He'd say the New Deal relief was good charity, but the price and wage controls, like the NRA, actually interfered with the market and made it harder for businesses to hire people.
And then there's the real business cycle theory.
Which is the most critical? Studies like Cole and Ohanian argue that New Deal policies might have prolonged the Depression by 7 years by preventing labor markets from clearing naturally.
Meaning they kept wages artificially high.
Right. Though critics would say that letting the market clear naturally implies letting millions of people starve until wages drop low enough to be profitable, which is a tough sell in a democracy.
So as we wrap this up, let's look at the legacy. When we step back, how did the New Deal change America?
It transformed the government from a distant observer into an active participant in your life. Before 1933, the federal government delivered the mail and defended the border.
And that was about it.
After 1933, the government guaranteed your bank account, provided your electricity, paved your road, and sent you a pension check.
It established the principle that the government has a responsibility to rehabilitate and preserve human resources.
Exactly. And physically, it is stamped on the American landscape. If you drive over a bridge, visit a state park, or turn on a light switch in rural Tennessee, you are interacting with the New Deal.
And politically, it created the New Deal coalition.
It realigned American politics for 30 years. It brought together labor unions, blue-collar workers, minorities, and white Southerners groups that often didn't get along under the Democratic umbrella.
So here is my final thought for the listener to chew on. We often think of the New Deal as this big, liberal, left-wing revolution.
Right.
But some historians argue it was actually a conservative movement in disguise.
It's a provocative idea, but I think it holds water. Look at the alternatives in the 1930s. You had Stalin in Russia ending unemployment through brutal communism. You had Hitler in Germany stabilizing the economy through fascism.
Democracy was looking pretty weak.
The New Deal didn't succumb to either. FDR didn't nationalize the banks permanently. He didn't take over the industries. He reformed capitalism just enough to save it.
So he gave the people enough security that they didn't turn to the extremists.
Precisely.
So was it a revolution, or was it just a rescue mission to save the existing system from its own worst excesses?
That is the question. And in many ways, that tension between the free market and government security is the debate we are still having in every election today.
The New Deal isn't history. It's the operating system we are still running on. Thanks for diving deep with us.
Stay curious. Okay, so I want to start today with a little mental exercise. I want you to just, picture a marble.
Yeah.
A standard glass marble. Maybe it's got a blue swirl in it, and it's just sitting there in the palm of your hand. You got it.
I am visualizing the marble. Yep.
All right. Now, I want you to scale that marble up. Compare the size of that little glass ball to the size of the entire planet Earth.
Right. That's a staggering difference. We're talking about a scale that is hard to even really comprehend.
It kind of breaks your brain a little, right?
Yeah.
But here's the hook. That ratio, the difference in size between that marble and our planet, is the exact same ratio as 1 nanometer to 1 meter.
And that really puts it into perspective. It really does. We throw around words like small or microscopic, but this is a realm that is so incredibly tiny, our normal intuitions just completely fail.
Exactly. When I say small, I'm thinking like a grain of rice, or maybe a dust mite if I'm feeling particularly scientific.
Sure.
But compared to the nanoscale, a dust mite is basically Godzilla.
That's actually a pretty accurate comparison.
So, welcome to the deep dive. Today, we are zooming in way, way into the world of nanotechnology. And I have to be honest, I see this word slapped on everything these days.
Oh, everywhere.
I saw a nanotech car wax, and I'm pretty sure it was just wax. So before we get into the really cool sci-fi stuff, we need to draw a hard line. What actually is it? Is it just anything that's small?
No, and that's a crucial distinction we have to make right off the bat because there's a lot of, marketing fluff out there. If you just make a transistor smaller, that's microtechnology. That's miniaturization.
That's just, honey, I shrunk the kids.
Exactly. It's impressive engineering, don't get me wrong, but it's still operating under the standard classical laws of physics. True nanotechnology is defined pretty strictly as the manipulation of matter, where at least one dimension is between 1 and 100 nanometers.
1 to 100, that seems like a very specific window. Almost arbitrary. Why not 200?
It's not arbitrary at all. That 1 to 100 nanometer range is the strike zone. It's the threshold where the rules of the game just fundamentally change. We're not just talking about smallness anymore. We are entering a regime where the laws of classical physics, gravity, inertia, all the things that govern our daily lives, they start to fade away.
And the weird stuff takes over.
And the weird, spooky laws of quantum mechanics take over.
And that is our mission for this deep dive. We're not just going to list small things. We're going to explore how manipulating individual atoms changes reality, how we figured out how to even do that, which is a crazy story in itself.
It really is.
And the huge tension between the medical miracles this promises and the potential environmental monsters we might be creating.
It is the ultimate double-edged sword story. But to really understand the stakes, you have to get the physics. You have to understand why that 100 nanometer line matters so much.
Okay, let's unpack the weirdness then. You said below 100 nanometers, the rules bend. The research we look at highlights two main sort of superpowers that emerge: surface area and quantum effects.
Right, and let's tackle surface area first. It sounds like boring high school geometry, I know.
I was going to say.
But at this scale, it's explosive.
I remember surface area to volume ratio from biology class, but refresh my memory. Why is this a superpower?
Okay, think of it this way. Imagine you have a solid cube of gold sitting on your desk. Most of the atoms in that block are stuck on the inside, right?
Right, they're surrounded.
They're surrounded by other gold atoms on all sides. They're stable, they're happy, and they're doing absolutely nothing.
They're the introvert atoms. They're staying home.
Precisely. But now imagine you chop that block in half. You've just exposed a whole new layer of atoms. Now, keep chopping and keep chopping down and down until you have a pile of nanoparticles.
Okay.
Suddenly, you have millions of these tiny particles, and a massive percentage of their atoms are now on the surface.
The introverts have been forced out onto the stage.
And they are not happy about it. This is the key. Surface atoms are chemically unsatisfied. They have what we call dangling bonds. They're missing neighbors, so they desperately want to grab onto something, anything to stabilize themselves.
So they just become super reactive.
Extremely reactive. You can take a material like gold, which is famous for being inert. It doesn't rust. It doesn't tarnish.
Right. It sits in shipwrecks for centuries.
Exactly. But if you chop it down to, say, 5 nanometers, it suddenly becomes an incredibly potent chemical catalyst. It can literally explode. It can make reactions happen that would never happen otherwise.
That is wild. So it's the exact same stuff, same element, but just by changing the geometry, just by making it smaller, you've turned it from a paperweight into a chemical engine.
You've got it. That's why nanoparticles are so useful for things like catalytic converters, but it's also why they're potentially toxic. They just interact with everything they touch.
Okay, so that's the chemistry side. But then there's the second factor you mentioned, quantum size effects. This is where you tell me gold isn't gold anymore.
It really isn't. And this is where your brain might hurt a little. In our world, the macro world, gold is yellow. Always. It's a defining characteristic.
Yeah.
But at the nanoscale, gold can be red. It can be purple, blue, even transparent.
Stop. How is that possible? I thought color was just a fundamental property of an element.
Well, color is just how light interacts with electrons. In a big block of gold, the electrons have plenty of room to roam around. They form what we call a sea of electrons.
Okay.
But when you shrink that gold down to a tiny nanoparticle, you're trapping those electrons in a very small box.
Yeah.
You're engaging in quantum confinement.
Like putting a wild horse in a closet?
That's a great analogy. And because they're confined, they start to vibrate in very specific ways. It's called surface plasmon resonance. The electrons oscillate at a frequency that depends entirely on the size of the particle.
So if you change the size of the particle...
You change the frequency of that vibration, which changes the color of light it absorbs and reflects.
So by shrinking the particle, you are literally tuning the electron.
You are tuning the fundamental properties of matter. Conductivity, its melting point, magnetism, all of these things we think of as fixed constants for an element are actually tunable variables if you can control the size of the cluster.
That is. It's like we've been painting with, like, 3 primary colors for all of human history, and suddenly we realize we can mix infinite shades just by changing the size of the brush.
That's a beautiful and very accurate analogy.
But here's the thing that always trips me up. We're talking about things that are a billionth of a meter. We can't see them. I can't just squint and see an atom. So how do we know any of this? How are we even having this conversation?
You're right, you can't see them. Not with light, anyway. The wavelength of visible light is roughly 400 to 700 nanometers. A nanoparticle might be 5 nanometers.
So the light wave is like a tidal wave going over a pebble. It just misses it completely.
Completely misses it. Your optical microscope, the kind you used in school, is useless here. To see the nanoscale, we had to invent a completely new way to interact with the world. We had to stop trying to look and start trying to touch.
The notes mention the STM, the scanning tunneling microscope.
Yes, this was the Galileo moment for nanotechnology. It was invented by Gerd Binnig and Heinrich Rohrer at IBM Zurich back in 1981.
And how does it work if it's not using light?
Okay, think of an old-school record player. You have a needle, a stylus, that traces the physical grooves of a record to create sound.
Okay, I'm with you. Physical contact.
Well, not quite contact. Imagine that needle is sharpened so perfectly that the tip is just one single atom wide.
Wow.
And instead of dragging it in a groove, you hover it just above the surface of the material you want to look at.
How close are we talking?
Incredibly close. So close that a quantum phenomenon happens. Electrons actually start to tunnel or jump across the tiny gap between the tip and the surface, and that creates a tiny electrical current.
So it's like a little spark jumping that gap.
A silent, invisible spark. And as you scan that tip across the surface, you measure that current. If the tip goes over an atom, the distance changes, the signal changes. If it goes over a hole between atoms, it changes again.
And a computer just draws a map from that data.
You're not taking a photo. You're drawing a topographic map based on feeling the electron clouds of the atoms.
That's amazing.
And it was revolutionary. Binnig and Rohrer won the Nobel Prize for it in 1986. But the real mind-blowing moment, the one that changed everything, happened a few years later in 1989.
What happened?
Scientists at IBM realized something else. They realized that if they cranked up the voltage on the tip just a little bit, they weren't just sensing the atoms.
You could do more than just sense them.
You could stick to them, they could pick them up.
You could literally drag and drop atoms.
They used the STM to pick up 35 individual xenon atoms and arrange them on a nickel surface to spell out IBM.
The world's smallest billboard.
But think about what that means. For the entire history of humanity, we've manipulated matter in bulk. We pour concrete, we smelt iron, we carve wood, trillions of atoms at a time.
Right.
This was the first time a human being reached down into the fabric of the universe and said, I want this specific atom to go here.
That is the moment it shifted from observation to construction.
Yeah.
That's the dawn of the era we're in right now.
It is. But what's interesting is, while the engineers were high-fiving over moving atoms, there was this massive intellectual war brewing in the theoretical world over whether we could ever actually build anything useful this way.
All right, let's go back in time a bit. Because before IBM was playing Scrabble with atoms, there were people just dreaming about this. We have to talk about Feynman.
Richard Feynman, the rock star physicist. In 1959, he gave a talk at Caltech that is now legendary. It was called There's Plenty of Room at the Bottom.
Such a great title.
It really is. And in that talk, he just posed a simple challenge. He asked, why can't we write the entire Encyclopedia Britannica on the head of a pin?
And he did the math.
He ran the math and said, look, the laws of physics don't forbid this. He argued that biological systems do it all the time with DNA, so why can't we? He basically called his shot 30 years before the tech even existed.
He saw the destination before anyone even had a map. But he didn't use the word nanotechnology, did he?
No, no. That word was coined later, in 1974, by a Japanese scientist named Norio Taniguchi. But the man who really blew this concept up in the public's mind and started the war I mentioned was K. Eric Drexler.
Right, the author of Engines of Creation.
Yes, published in 1986. Drexler was this incredible visionary, and he took Feynman's idea and just pushed it to its absolute logical extreme. He proposed the molecular assembler.
The replicator from Star Trek, essentially.
Pretty much. A nanoscale machine, a tiny little robot that could grab individual atoms and snap them together to build anything. A steak, a computer, you name it. He called it molecular manufacturing. He painted this picture of a world where scarcity didn't exist because we could just print whatever we needed, atom by atom.
And this is where the scientific community really split, isn't it?
Yeah.
Because that sounds amazing, but it also sounds, well, like magic.
It sounded exactly like magic to a lot of hardcore chemists, and the loudest, most prominent critic was a Nobel laureate named Richard Smalley.
The Drexler-Smalley debate. I love a good scientific beef.
Oh, this was a heavyweight fight. It played out in the pages of chemical and engineering news in the early 2000s. And Smalley argued that mechanosynthesis, this idea of building with little robot arms, was just flat out impossible.
What was his argument? Why can't we just snap atoms together like they're Legos?
He had two big points. The first was the fat fingers problem. He said, okay, if you build a robot arm to pick up an atom, the fingers of that arm are also made of atoms. They'd just be too big and clumsy to manipulate a single atom with any precision.
It's like trying to fix a wristwatch while wearing boxing gloves.
Perfect analogy. And his second point was the sticky fingers problem. At the nanoscale, gravity is meaningless, but stickiness, Van der Waals forces, is everything.
Right.
Smalley argued that if your little nanobot picked up an atom, it would never be able to let go. It would just stick to the manipulator arm.
So the robot would just get gummed up with atoms it couldn't release.
Right. Smalley's whole point was that chemistry doesn't work like mechanics. You can't force atoms together. You have to coax them with heat and pressure and solvents. He thought Drexler was selling pure science fiction.
That seems like a pretty devastating argument. Did Drexler have a comeback?
Drexler's comeback was simple. He said, look in the mirror.
Me.
You. Your body. You are proof that molecular machines work. Your body is filled with them. Ribosomes are these tiny machines that read a tape of RNA and assemble proteins one amino acid at a time.
So biology is already doing exactly what Smalley said was impossible.
Exactly. Drexler's whole point was, if nature can do it with soft, wet, squishy biological stuff, why can't we eventually figure out how to do it with hard, rigid engineering?
So who won the debate?
In the short term, Smalley won the PR war. Definitely. He convinced the funding agencies to focus on materials, science, better batteries, stronger coatings, rather than these far-out sci-fi robots.
So we got better khakis instead of infinite food. A bit of a letdown.
Maybe a little. But those materials, we really shouldn't scoff at them because, and this is the ironic part, while Smalley was arguing you couldn't build these cool new structures, his own team was discovering forms of carbon that completely changed the world.
We're talking about buckyballs.
Buckyballs. Buckminster fullerene, C60. In 1985, Smalley, along with Kroto and Curl, found this molecule that looks exactly like a soccer ball made of 60 carbon atoms. A perfectly stable, hollow cage.
And then after that came the nanotubes.
Yes, in 1991, Sumio Ejima discovered carbon nanotubes. Just imagine taking a sheet of chicken wire made of carbon atoms, that's graphene, and rolling it into a perfect, seamless tube.
And why are these little rolled-up tubes so important?
Because the carbon bond is one of the strongest in the universe. So these tubes are like tens of times stronger than steel at a fraction of the weight, and they can conduct electricity better than copper.
So this is where nanotech moved from, wouldn't it be cool if, to here's a bucket of actual stuff we can use.
Exactly. And that brings us to today, because I think there's this big misconception that nanotech is all future stuff. But looking at the research, it seems like I'm probably interacting with it right now.
Oh, you almost certainly are. We might not have Drexler's self-replicating assemblers yet, but we have absolutely mastered what we call passive nanomaterials. Nanotech is in your house.
Okay, give me the core. Where is it hiding?
Let's start in the bathroom. Sunscreen.
Sunscreen. Really?
Yeah. Do you remember that old school zinc nose coat? The thick white paste lifeguards used to wear?
Oh yeah, the ghost look. Very distinctive.
That was zinc oxide or titanium dioxide. It was a thick white paste because the particles were big enough to reflect visible light. Today, your sunscreen uses the exact same stuff, but they're ground down into nanoparticles.
And because they're smaller.
They interact with light differently. They let visible light pass right through so the lotion's clear on your skin, but they still catch and block the dangerous UV rays. You get all the protection without the war paint.
That is a direct application of that size changes physics rule we were just talking about.
It is. Okay, now check your feet. Are you wearing athletic socks?
I am. And I assume they are now high-tech.
If they claim to be anti-odor or antimicrobial, they're likely infused with silver nanoparticles.
Why silver?
Well, silver has been known as an antimicrobial agent for centuries, but at the nanoscale, that surface area is huge. It constantly releases silver ions that just shred the cell walls of bacteria. So my socks are a chemical weapon against foot fungus.
Your socks are high-tech warfare.
Yeah.
I'll never look at my laundry the same way again. What about bigger tech? Cars, phones?
Electric vehicles are a huge one. A big part of the battery revolution is being driven by nanotech. They use carbon nanotubes to reinforce the battery structure. It basically prevents the battery from cracking as it charges and discharges over and over.
Which gives you more cycles and faster charging. Exactly. So the range anxiety you don't have is partly thanks to nanotubes. We also see it in sports equipment, lighter tennis rackets, stronger golf balls. But the field that I think is the most exciting by far isn't consumer goods. It's medicine.
This is where the source material mentions nanoencapsulation, and that sounds like a total game changer.
It is one of the most high-impact fields, nanomedicine. The concept of nanoencapsulation is basically building a tiny molecular delivery truck.
A truck for drugs.
Right. Think about traditional chemotherapy. It's
Yeah.
brutal, right? It's essentially carpet bombing your entire body to kill a tumor.
It kills all the good stuff along with the bad. That's why people get so sick.
Exactly. Nanotech allows us to build a Trojan horse. We can encase the toxic drug inside a nanocarrier, and then we can cover that shell with proteins that are designed to only stick to cancer cells.
So it just floats past the heart, past the lungs, finds the tumor, and then it opens up.
Precisely. Targeted delivery, it reduces side effects massively because the poison only goes where it's needed.
And there was one specific example in the notes that just blew my mind. Something about cockroaches and DNA.
Yes, this is a fascinating study. Researchers use something called DNA origami to create nanobots.
I stopped on that one. DNA origami?
It's exactly what it sounds like. We think of DNA as the code of life, right? But
Yeah.
physically, it's just a long molecule that pairs up in very predictable ways. I binds to T, C binds to G.
Okay, sure.
Scientists realized they could write a synthetic strand of DNA that, when you put it in a test tube, just folds itself up into a specific 3D shape, like a tiny box.
Box made of DNA.
A box with a lid. And they designed it to have a molecular lock on that lid. The lock only opens when it bumps into a specific molecule found only in the target cells.
So they injected these into cockroaches.
And the nanobots successfully traveled through the cockroach's body, found the specific cells they were looking for. The lid popped open and they delivered their payload. It's a logic gate. If target is present, then open box.
That's computing inside a living creature.
We are performing computation inside a living organism using the building blocks of life itself.
It completely blurs the line between biology and engineering.
Huh.
We're using the stuff of life as a construction material to fix life.
It's profound. And speaking of computing, we can't ignore the electronics side. We all know Moore's law is slowing down because chips can't get much smaller using traditional silicon.
Right, we're hitting the physical limits of silicon atoms.
But nanotech offers a way forward. We're seeing things like on-chip optical quantum information processing using light instead of just electrons. Single nanowire lasers.
Transmitting information on a scale smaller than a virus.
Yeah. And just to show off what's possible, you have to mention the Nanobible,
This was incredible.
a project by the Technion in Israel. They etched the entire Hebrew Bible, all 1.2 million letters, onto a silicon chip that is 0.5 square millimeters.
Half a millimeter. That's the size of a single grain of sugar.
It just demonstrates the immense density of information storage that's possible when you can control matter at this level. You could store all the data in the world in a shoebox.
Okay, so we have super batteries, cancer-fighting origami bots, and stain-proof pants. This sounds like a utopia.
Yeah.
But this is the deep dive, so we know there's always a flip side. we have to talk about the risks.
We do, and the risks are significant precisely because they stem from the exact same properties that make nanotech so useful.
The size.
The size. Small size means deep penetration.
That sounds ominous.
It's a toxicological unknown. Your body has defenses against dust, right? You cough it up, your nose filters it. But nanoparticles, they are small enough to slip right between the cells of your lungs and enter your bloodstream directly. They can cross the blood-brain barrier.
And that's supposed to be the fortress wall protecting our most vital organ.
And nanotech can just walk right through the cracks. Once they're inside, because they have that super high surface area we talked about, they are incredibly reactive.
Can you give me a specific, concrete example?
There is a famous and very worrying study about carbon nanotubes. Remember, these are the super strong tubes. But physically, they look like long, thin needles.
Okay.
And when they're inhaled, research suggests they behave in a way that is disturbingly similar to asbestos fibers.
Oh, wow. Asbestos. That is a loaded word.
It is, and the comparison is chilling. The immune system cells in your lungs, macrophages, they try to eat the fiber to clean it up, but the nanotube is too long and tough. The cell can't digest it, it gets frustrated, and it dies, releasing all these inflammatory chemicals.
And if that happens over and over again?
You get chronic inflammation, scarring, and potentially mesothelioma-like pathology.
So we might be manufacturing the next global health crisis in a lab right now and not even know it.
It is a valid and serious concern. We're creating materials that evolution just hasn't prepared our bodies to handle. And it's not just our health. What about the environment? Let's go back to those silver socks.
The fungus killers.
What happens when you put them in the laundry?
The silver.
Yeah.
It washes out. Into the water.
And eventually, it ends up at the wastewater treatment plant. Now, how do those plants work? They rely on colonies of good bacteria to break down our sewage.
Oh, I see where this is going.
If we flood that system with nanosilver, a powerful antibacterial agent, we could sterilize the very biological systems we rely on to keep our water clean.
So the very thing that makes the sock good, for me, makes it a potential disaster for the environment.
Precisely. It is the paradox of potency.
So who's regulating this? Please tell me someone is watching the store here.
Well, that's the regulatory gap. Agencies are trying, but they're mostly bolting on nanotech to existing laws. But the laws are based on chemical composition, not on size or structure.
Explain what you mean by that.
If you have a regulation for silver, it treats a silver coin and a silver nanoparticle the exact same way.
Yeah.
Chemically, they're both just ag, but physically, as we've learned, they act completely differently.
One sits in your pocket, the other penetrates your cell walls.
And the law doesn't really distinguish between them effectively yet. The notes mention that as of 2006, Berkeley, California, was the only city in the entire U.S. with specific nanotech regulations. We're catching up, but technology always moves faster than bureaucracy.
And that's the core dilemma, isn't it?
It is. If you regulate too hard and too early on a technology this new, you might stifle the very innovation that could cure cancer or solve our energy problems. But if you don't regulate enough, you risk an environmental or health disaster.
It's a tightrope walk over a canyon.
It is the definition of a transformative technology. Fire burns you, but it also cooks your food. Nanotech is the new fire.
So let's try to summarize this massive journey. We started with a marble in the earth. We went through the dreamers like Feynman, the fighters like Smalley. We're now literally wearing nanotech on our feet and putting it in our cars. But at the same time, we're standing on the edge of a potential toxicological cliff.
That is the reality of the nanoscale. It offers us these productive nanosystems, the ability to build from the bottom up. But it demands a level of foresight and responsibility we haven't really had to exercise before. We aren't just shaping wood or melting steel, we're rewriting the very code of matter itself.
It's fascinating and, yeah, a little bit terrifying, which is usually the sign of a truly big idea.
I agree completely.
Before we go, I want to leave our listeners with one final thought to mull over. We've talked about materials and we've talked about computing. But what happens when those two things merge completely?
You're talking about programmable matter.
Programmable matter. This was at the very end of the notes. Think about this. If we can control matter at the atomic level and we can integrate information science directly into materials, the line between hardware and software just disappears.
So you're imagining a physical object that you can update like an app, a chair that can reconfigure itself into a table, or a car body that can change its aerodynamic shape, or even its color on the fly.
We are so used to our phones changing with a software update. Are we ready for a world where the physical objects around us, our cars, our clothes, our homes, are just as fluid?
That is the ultimate promise of nanotechnology. It turns the physical world into a programmable medium.
Something to think about next time you put on those fancy socks. Thanks for diving deep with us.
A pleasure, as always.
We'll catch you on the next one.